Welcome to Beatdowns with the Boz. Today I have for you a super sweet deck. It's a variation of the Rubens Tokens deck. This past weekend I was at GP Toronto, where there were two green-white tokens decks in the top 8. One by John Stern and the other by I'm blanking on the other guy's name. But they had some interesting changes. John Stern played 4 Lambholt Pacifist in his main deck and played no Thraben Inspectors. And then the other guy played 4 Den Protectors in his main deck and no Oath of Nissa. So just to kind of address those two cards, Lambholt Pacifist had been in the sideboard of Ruben's list and is particularly good against White Weenie, but it's kind of a good card in this deck. It doesn't look like you have access to that many ways of allowing it to attack, but you really do. Like Sylvan Advocate later in the game becomes 4 power on his own, but the minus on Nissa is something that you frequently use, and the emblem on Gideon is one of his best abilities. So the Lambholt Pacifist gets to 4 power and toughness on its own relatively frequently, and Dromoka's command also helps with that. The other thing too is you really want to have 2 drops that have reasonably high power and toughness in order to make Dromoka's command good. If you have a draw where you go turn 1 Oath of Nissa, turn 2 Hangarback Walker, turn 3 Nissa Voice of Zendikar, your Dromoka's command isn't really looking that good against like a Thalia's Lieutenant that's already become like a 3/3. So having some early drops that are oversized is pretty important to making the most of Dromoka's command. Den Protector is really good also because it with this deck the ground gets so clogged up with all the tokens that you generate that the board typically stalls out, and you really want access to flyers like Archangel of Avacyn. Den Protector is kind of like a flyer. Obviously it doesn't have flying, but it has the evasion in a lot of the same circumstances. Like if you have a Nissa and they have a Nissa, frequently your plant tokens end up just chump blocking forever. And if they just played your Nissa first, they get to ultimate it first, which is devastating. But Den Protector can just, slice and dice right through the Gideon and Nissa tokens. The other thing worth noting too is Den Protector dies pretty easily to flipping Avacyn, which is problematic. But the Pacifist, similar to Sylvan Advocate, there's a pretty high chance that if you play a Pacifist on turn 2, you're going to be able to flip your Avacyn on turn 5 without this dying. There's so many ways of giving it an extra point of toughness, and sometimes it'll just flip. So it synergizes quite well with your other cards. And then not John Stern, but the other guy who top-aided had 2 Angelic Purges on his sideboard, and I was playing some games with Jarvis Yu while we were at the airport. And he was playing green-black Aristocrats, and I just decided to main deck these Angelic Purges because I thought they'd be sweet, and they were just phenomenal. Against these Aristocrat decks, Angelic Purge is one of the best cards you can have. The Exile is super relevant because you can get Cryptolith, right? The green enchantment that lets all their creatures tap for mana. It allows you to exile Zulaport Cutthroats so they're not recurred with a Liliana, and when they are exiled, they don't trigger, so you get to kill a Cutthroat without the triggers. And also, a pretty common play pattern before I had Angelic Purge was to play Archangel Avacyn on turn 5 and then play Hangarback Walker for 0, so that I'd pass the turn back, Avacyn would immediately flip and wipe their board. The problem is, so frequently they would just sack everything they had to a Nantuko Husk, and that Nantuko Husk would be able to come in, it would survive, it would have 3 damage on it, but it'd be like a 12/12 or something ridiculous like that. It would attack, and sometimes I'd end up having to chump block with my Avacyn if it was the only permanent around, or some other important creature like a Sylvan Advocate. So Angelic Purge allows you to, not only does it give you another way to flip your Avacyn, but the play pattern of end of turn Avacyn, untap, play Angelic Purge, sacrifice whatever, and exile your Nantuko Husk ensures that their board will be completely wiped, which is really good. And it's another out to Ormendahl. It's essentially replacing Stasis Snare, which, Stasis Snare is a good card. It's instant speed, which is super relevant, But the fact that you get to sacrifice something is pretty valuable in this deck, because sometimes it allows you to flip your Avacyn, or it allows you to play a big Hangarback Walker, and before your opponent Reflector Mages it or something like that, you can just pop it yourself and get all the tokens. So sacrificing is something pretty valuable, and you have some disposable fodder in Oath of Nissa, random tokens, and worst comes to worst, you can always sacrifice a land. In the late game scenario, this deck can actually flood out a little bit. And one other addition that I have to the deck is Tireless Tracker, and you can sacrifice the clues even to Angelic Purge. So I think the sacrificing component of this card is actually a benefit rather than a drawback. And then being able to exile something is phenomenal. Like, one thing that was annoying about Stasis Snare is sometimes I'd be against green-red goggles, then they'd cast an Atarka, and I'd have to Stasis Snare it to get through. But then they'd play a World Breaker and pop my Stasis Snare, and their Atarka would come back into play and kill all my stuff again. So Angelic Purge kind of resolves that. And if you are going to play some of Den Protectors, you can recur Angelic Purges, although you can't recur Stasis Snares because they stay in play. So that's another nice little synergy there. And then just to speak briefly about the sideboard, since I've got this one Den Protector main, I really like Deathmist Raptor. In my previous videos, I was basically playing Deathmist Raptor Collected Company decks, and I think Deathmist Raptor is just a great card. I think it actually fits pretty well into the sideboard of this deck for a couple reasons. One is that when you're against the white aggressive decks, Nissa Voice of Zendikar is really bad. You really want to be able to take it out, but if you take it out, you just have this huge hole in your 3-drop slot. The other thing that's annoying is sometimes a Thalia's Attendant just gets out of hand. It's huge. You can't Dromoka's Command it anymore. Avacyn flipping won't take care of it, and you're really hoping to just hit one of your few Tragic Arrogances. But if you play Deathmist Raptor, it fills your 3-drop slot when you take out the Nissas. It can kill anything, no matter how big their Thalia's Attendant is, and it gives you a source of card advantage without essentially paying for it. And what I mean by that is it gives you a source of card advantage without it being a card like Tireless Tracker. You have to sink extra mana into it to get the value. Or, the extreme example would be something like Painful Truths, where it's great card advantage, but you have to pay a lot for it. Deathmist Raptor in the aggro matchups, 3 mana for a 3/3 Death Touch is just perfectly fine. I'd say it's even good. And the card advantage is just an extra bonus tacked on that you're not really paying extra for. So it's really sweet in those situations. I think it might even have some applications in the Bant Company matchup, because the Planeswalkers end up being a little weak there, although they are better in that matchup than they are in the White Weenie deck. And then the other place where it has utility is against control decks that are taking out some of their spot removal and bringing in I'm blanking on the 2 black and a colorless enchantment that gives all tokens -2/-2, but they're set up more to fight a tokens game, and Kalidas can be a problem, so it might not be a good idea, but it gives you the opportunity to kind of juke and jive a little bit with either applying a lot of pressure with tokens or applying a lot of pressure with recurring creatures, and that sort of thing can be really powerful against someone who's trying to set up a post-board configuration to answer what you're doing, if you can kind of catch them with something that they're just not prepared to answer. I have extra Lambholt Pacifists again for the White Weenie matchup. Probably have more than I need for that matchup, but I'm not exactly sure what other cards I need, to be honest. And then the Den Protectors coming in the control matchup when the Deathmist Raptors too, just give you extra card advantage. The other thing that's nice about that too is I've seen some players, especially Grixis opponents, when they're up against green-white tokens, they'll board into cards like Dragon Master Outcast, which is pretty devastating. A lot of times the green-white tokens deck is a little shy on interaction, but if you have some number of Angelic Purges and Dromoka's commands, and then some Den Protectors to recur them, that means you get extra copies of whatever card you need, and in a situation where you're not exactly sure what cards you're going to need, Dem Protectors can pull a lot of weight. Sometimes you're going to be in a situation where all you want is more copies of Gideon. And frequently, a lot of the control decks, they're set up to handle 4 copies of Gideon. But if you board in these 3 Dem Protectors and you're just recurring Gideons, they're not going to be able to handle 7 Gideons. Like, a lot of them are saying, well, I've got 1 Dragon Lord Silumgar to take care of 1 Gideon. I've got 2 Ruinous Paths to take care of another Gideon. And I've got 1 Silumgar's Command to take care of the 4th Gideon. And maybe I'll be lucky and I can attack 1 down with a Goblin Dark Dweller or something like that. But you can see by those numbers that they're set up to handle 4 Gideons. They're not set up to handle 7 Gideons. So Den Protector ends up being a card that can do just a ton of work. I have it in the sideboard because it is a little slow, and it doesn't quite synergize as well with some of the other cards. So it's a card that is going to be better in post-board games rather than pre-board games. And so I have it on the sideboard. And then I went down to 2 Tragic Arrogances because despite them being amazing, and one of my favorite cards in the 75, it's just tough to have so many 5-drops. A lot of times against the decks that you want Tragic Arrogance, you don't want to play your Hangarback on turn 2 so that you can play Archangel on turn 5 and 0 Hangarback. And that ends up making your curve just way too high, and you just don't have enough stuff on turns 2, 3, and 4. So I decided to just trim back on a Tragic Arrogance, just to free up a little bit of sideboard space. A lot of the cards on the sideboard that Ruben had, like for example the Big Angels, I think he mostly just played them because they're big and powerful and in an unknown field. That's kind of what you want. But now that the metagame's taking a little bit more shape, it's a little bit more reasonable to go a little leaner and make it so that your cards are good in specific situations rather than just random, powerful, expensive angels that are going to be pretty good in any situation, but are going to be overcosted as people make their decks more lean and efficient. The other thing too is, compared to Ruben's deck, this deck is a lot more normalized. And what I mean when I say that is that by not playing these Secure the Wastes, not playing the Thraben Inspectors, I'm playing a lot more just average good stuff that is a little easier for people to interact with. Ruben's list, it was actually kind of hard to interact with if you weren't really prepared for it, because so many of the creatures didn't really die to removal easily, like Thraben Inspector cantripped, and the Secure the Wastes, if you don't have a sweeper, you're just not dealing with those tokens. Even if you do have a sweeper, it's likely going to be sorcery speed, and the Secure the Waste is going to come in at instant speed, so it's going to be a problem. But so for the Pro Tour, I really liked Ruben's deck because it was hard to interact with. It was very extreme towards the token strategy, and in a field where people don't exactly know what you're doing and aren't going to be able to tune their deck to beat you, doing something really extreme is really powerful. And that's one of the reasons why on the Pro Tour level, so frequently we see these fairly linear, fairly aggressive, and also kind of weird decks do well, like the Green Black Aristocrats deck is a great example, or at the previous 2 Pro Tours, like the red burn decks. It's just, if someone has a better list than you had in your gauntlet, it's going to be hard to beat them. But now that deck lists are out, people have gotten practice, the metagame's getting established, I feel like people are becoming a little bit more prepared to the extreme token strategy. And if that's going to be the case, I'd rather have a slightly more well-rounded deck that has slightly better card quality. And while Secure the Waste can be a great top deck late in the game, it's usually not very good to have to cast early on, and Thraben Inspector is just not really a good card. It did a lot of work in helping ensure that you didn't get run over and you were able to draw into the powerful things you could do. Like the last time I showed you guys this deck list, I kind of wanted to model it in the sense that you would model a combo deck. And now we still have some of those combo elements, but we're a little bit more normalized so that the combo elements are kind of an extra bonus, but we're a little better at just efficiently curving out and generating some card advantage and interacting with our opponent and just kind of winning in a more general sense. So, like, I still got the Abbey, and granted, I don't have Secure the Waste to flip it quite as easily. I'm still going to have a lot of stuff, and Nissa and Gideon are still great at generating a lot of tokens. So I think that basically covers the deck, the changes I've made, and then so it gives you like a little bit of insight as to how I go about tuning a deck. As I'm playing these games, the three things that I'm going to be thinking about the most, and this is one of the things you should always do when you sit down to test a matchup, is you should ask yourself what questions you're trying to answer in your playtesting session. The like first, maybe 50 games or so or less, it's okay to not really have any questions because you're just trying to get a feel for things. You're just trying to get some general information, get a general feel for the deck and its various matchups. But as you go farther into the tuning process, you want to start asking very specific questions. And the specific questions that I'm going to be asking myself are, if I draw Lambholt Pacifist and I'm against a control deck, how bad is it? If I'm in a situation where they're basically killing any other 4 toughness creature I have, and this Lambholt Pacifist doesn't get very many attacks in and then gets incidentally swept away with a Languish, that's pretty bad. So one of the questions I'm asking myself is, how good is Lambholt Pacifist going to be against control decks? Or just decks that have a lot of spot removal. Another question I'm going to be asking myself is this Den Protector better than Secure the Wastes? The question is probably going to be no, I would have to guess, because Secure the Waste synergizes so well. But I have this Den Protector in the main deck because I really want to know the answer to that question. And I'm going to get a better answer, or an answer more quickly, by main decking this Den Protector, so I get to see it come up in more and more scenarios. So I literally have like a piece of mail sitting underneath my screen with those questions written out so that I don't forget. And then I have like a little, kind of deck journal or whatever, and I have those questions written down, and when I finish these matches, I'll try to answer those questions in my little journal. And one of the things that's really good about that is a lot of times you'll ask yourself a question and you'll like kind of forget the answer. And if you write it down, then you can reference that later. So I think that covers it for the deck tech. And now it's time to get into some matches. So let's get to it.